This screencast is the sixth in a series of screencasts looking at Jez Butterworth's play Jerusalem, which I'm preparing for teaching under the new OCR A-level syllabus starting in 2015. So far in the series, we've looked at the pastoral genre, we've looked at Jerusalem as a satire play, we've looked at the contexts of the play, we've looked at carnival and the carnivalesque relationships within the play, and we've also looked at the idea of the forest as a setting. In this PowerPoint, I'm afraid it might be a little rambling. I'm exploring the idea of good and evil and dragons and dragon killers and everything else, and it will try and draw together quite a lot of ideas that appear during the play. Now, the play, as you will know if you are familiar with it, is set on April the 23rd. St. George's Day, Shakespeare's birth and death day, a great day of perceived Englishness. And it's the day, therefore, that celebrates this English saint who killed the dragon. The professor tells us the story at the end of Act 2 on page 83. But already there are moments of clarity in this. The knight, we're told, is from Cappadocia. He's not English. We can trace Romany gypsies, interestingly, to this area from the 8th or 9th century. He arrives at a city which is described as a stagnant pond whereby lives a dragon, which has envenomed all the country. Children are given as tribute to this beast, and the knight offers to kill it in return for Christianity being accepted. It's worth noting that when the professor tells the story, he doesn't end the story with St. George killing the dragon, just the offer, assuming that Christianity has been accepted. As he finishes, the act closes not with this sense of St. George or whatever, but with Phaedra, who at this point we still don't really know as Phaedra, we've seen her on the stage, giving a terrified look out into the forest. And we wonder to ourselves whether the dragon is actually still out there. I think it's very easy and straightforward when we think about the play to see Johnny as the dragon, and he's surrounded by his onlookers who are children. He certainly, in his role as a drug dealer, can be shown to be envenoming the surrounding area, and Davy, fairly early in the play, makes a very straightforward link with the ogre in the forest that people are not buying when they buy their new houses. He seems wild, he seems terrifying, he seems to have some form of extra human power. But I wonder what happens if we do reverse it. Johnny is a Romany. We get this from his proud speech to Marquis towards the end of the play about heritage and bloodline and everything else. And bloodline, something that would bother a knight. And he's taken up residence near the village. From his birth, he has seen the village and the surrounding area as being evil. His first words, "What is this dark place?" "England," replied his mother, is part of the birth narrative that we get. It's also worth noting that the children seek him out and are not given as sacrifice or tribute. He implies in some sort of way, and admittedly the logic is quite tortuous, safety rather than danger. It's also evident that the village seems to lack Christian values, charity, license, temperance, whatever it might be. It seems to be a hotbed of lust and abuse. Within the county, greed certainly seems to have replaced charity and care. We also notice that Johnny and Marky are the only characters in the play who actually have Christian names. John is what Dawn, his wife, calls Johnny. Marky, Mark, his son, disciples. Thoroughly Christian names. And although Wesley is named after the father of Methodism, when he speaks on page 92, 93 in Act 3, he's clearly in some form of great crisis living down in the village. If you are confused, I'm rather pleased, because one of the whole points of studying literature is to be aware of nuance, to be aware of the other side of any question, not to see everything as straightforward, clear, single answer. And it's vital at A-level that you begin to get this. What I'd like students to do at this point is to make a table starting to list the characteristics of Johnny in the village in terms of George and the Dragon. This is a task that I'll be setting my class at this point. I'm not going to do it for you, but just beginning to think, if we accept that Johnny is designed to be a very flawed character of light, as I like to think of it, light and dark, how does this work? Remember that pastoral has as one of its ideas a longing for a better time before. It's clear from much that he says that Johnny wishes to be linked to the land and thus to nature and a pre-Christian environment. And within the woods, we already have hints of this. Lee has already described it as being holy and full of ley lines. I've included a link so you can go and look at the concept of ley lines, specifically in Wiltshire, to the PowerPoint here. Johnny lives at the epicentre of this. He is right in the middle, and he relates to himself as being granite and heavy stone that will not be moved. In contrast, the softer elements of chalk and wood. In fact, we see him chopping wood in Act 1 and demonstrating his mastery over the wood in that way. He is more than that. His use of stone is interesting. He describes bodies of generations of Byrons being scattered over the landscape. And this surely relates to a sight very common for anybody who knows northern Wiltshire of sarsen stones. These huge, admittedly sandstone rather than granite, but huge stones that just lie in the countryside. Nobody knows where they came from, why they're there, or what they're doing. What we do know is that they formed the great standing stones of Stonehenge and Avebury, but nobody really knows how they were moved or how they got there. Another interesting twitch is that the Wiltshire sarsen stone, as it's called, has in its name a derivation from Saracen, links again to Turkey, to the idea of St. George somehow being linked to these bodies lying under the stones, waiting to be called in times of crisis. The paganism of the play is so clear at the end of the play, with the great curses redolent of a pre-Christian time, the power in Johnny's eyes, his incantations, the awakening of the forebears, the use of the drum, which harkens back to myth in terms of King Arthur lying ready to be summoned to save his country, but also to more recent, urban myth is the wrong term, but popular myth regarding great English warriors such as Sir Francis Drake, who was in popular culture and popular songs said to hang a drum, which, if it were beaten, would bring him back to save the country again. All this is set against this rather shallow neo-paganism, I've called it, you can call it what you want, of the fair. And this idea of the rebirth, something we discussed in the screencast looking at Carnival. And then we begin to see whether Johnny as George begins to work as well, and stealing from Shakespeare, and I apologise, whether he's more sinned against than sinning. On a brief sort of checklist of deadly sins, you're welcome to change this, add to it, whatever. We see that the village actually seems to have a great deal more. There's the wishing to build, the kickbacks. In terms of lust, it's interesting. The women seem to fall for Johnny. He is called to decorate their houses. We've also seen his implications to do with Fawcett and Hans in Salisbury, and Troy in the potential abuse of Phaedra. Now, Johnny definitely indulges the women of the village, but I wonder whether this is actually lust. He certainly doesn't seem to show anything of that in relation to the young girls that surround him in his camp. The village are angry at Johnny, and they take their anger out on him. Some possibly envy him his freedoms. Many are certainly seeking to get rid of their own guilt onto him. And within the village, there seems to be drugs and alcohol in terms of a sort of a gluttonous aspect. What Johnny also has, which we don't perhaps see in the village, is pride, of course, and it's pride that will probably cause his downfall. It's pride that probably is his tragic flaw, if we accept that he might be a tragic character. He will not lose face in front of the village. He will not accept what is probably reality. that with this great army of police and everything else lined up against him, it's time for him to admit defeat. So I think we have to have a sense, looking at both sides, that both sides could be seen as dragons. What Butterworth does ensure by leaving the ending open is that we are left to think about it. We are left to consider. At the end of Act 2, the professor introduced the George and Dragon story without concluding it. At the end of Act 3, it still is not concluded, and we need to draw our conclusions as to which two of the two sides really is the dragon that needs to be slain. Certainly, to the early Christians, the pagan was terrifying and had to be abolished or subsumed into sort of Christian hagiography. Obioses became George and Dragon stories and so on. The play, however, is called Jerusalem, and within this context, we need to think again, what is the message here? Blake is asking the question of whether the green and pleasant land was blessed by holy footsteps before industrialisation with dark satanic mills. The implication must be, therefore, that whether it was or not, the older society somehow is still there underneath these religious constructs that have been placed upon it, whether that be a Christian view or whether the new religion of the 21st century, the capitalist movement that we see. It's a play about replace and change. It's the fact that when we are in transition, there will be regret evident alongside hope. And there are three tasks that I'll be asking my class to do here, which you could start to look at. I'm interested to see where Lee begins to show either regret or hope as he prepares to leave. Interested to see how you answer the question of the development of the wood, whether it will be a change for the better, and who is doing more harm, Johnny or the council. And this needs to be considered, if you like, from the perspective both of a villager, but also as a post-pastoral eco-critic, for want of a better phrase. I might be wrong. My understanding of legalese is a little bit sketchy, but also it's also worth somewhere having at the back of your mind that the laws of adverse possession dating from 2002 would actually make Johnny the rightful owner of this land because he's used it for 12 years prior to 2002. This play is set in about 2009. We're told that Johnny moved to the wood in 1982. He's been there for 20 years prior to that adverse possession law, and therefore technically does, or could rather, own this land. The fact that a man who seems so knowledgeable about so many things hasn't challenged this in any way is interesting, and it perhaps again suggests this idea that he lives outside the temporal laws that are being produced by councils. He will not be bound by them, and therefore he won't use them either. We know that he lost his cherry in a barn, aged 12, and references to 1969 and Carnival Queen should lead that to be an age. So the sums don't quite add up, but we're told he's about 50 at the beginning of the play. All little things to have in the back of our mind. The next question, which we need to think about, is this. If this is a play which is asking us and holding a mirror to society and asking us to consider our life, which version of Englishness would you prefer to follow? The free and uncontrolled wood life, which, as I say, here comes with drugs, alcohol, animalistic behaviour and a moral code which is based on the Darwinian, or the restricted and nanified state of the council, in which profit is placed above all else, and that also comes with drugs and alcohol, but it seems to be ashamed of it and continually seems to be trying to hide the facts and create outcasts. There will be a debate. This is the motion. This House believes Johnny Rooster Byron to be the victim of a miscarriage of justice. I will film the debate, and I will post it to the department YouTube channel, again to act as a useful piece of revision material. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been useful. I hope you've gained ideas and thoughts and stimulus for your further study.